The gunshots echoed through the canyon like thunder, but Thomas Calloway didn't flinch. He'd heard enough bullets in his 30 years to know these weren't meant for him, not yet. The rain pelted his duster as he urged his stallion forward, squinting through the downpour at the faint glow of campfire light in the distance. The Blackwater Gang had Grace Brookfield and her family, and they wouldn't live to see morning unless he reached them first. The year was 1876, and the Arizona Territory was still wild as a rattlesnake with a stomped tail. Thomas had been tracking the Blackwater Gang for 3 days since they'd raided the Brookfield homestead and taken Grace, her younger brother, and their elderly father. The gang's leader, Victor Harlow, had a reputation for leaving no witnesses, but he also had a weakness for taking his time with captives, a cruelty that might just give Thomas the hours he needed. Rain soaked through Thomas's clothes as his horse's hooves thundered across the muddy terrain. His heart pounded against his ribs with each stride, matching the rhythm of the downpour. He wasn't a lawman, not anymore. But he'd made a promise to Sheriff Mills back in Copper Creek that he'd bring the Brookfields home safe. What he hadn't mentioned to the sheriff was that he and Grace had shared something special last spring when he'd passed through town. Nothing more than stolen glances and one dance at the Founders' Day celebration. But in that brief moment with her hand in his, something had awakened in him that he'd thought long dead. Something worth riding through hell itself to protect. He drew his horse to a stop behind a large outcropping of rocks, dismounting in one fluid motion. The animal's sides heaved as Thomas patted its neck, whispering, "Easy, Thunder. We ain't done yet." He secured the reins to a scrubby bush and crept forward to survey the outlaw camp below. 5 men circled a fire that sputtered in the rain. A wagon sat nearby with a canvas cover, and Thomas could make out the silhouette of someone sitting inside, likely where they were keeping the Brookfields. 2 men stood guard, rifles across their chests, while the others huddled near the fire passing a bottle. Thomas counted the seconds between lightning flashes, calculating. 1 man against 5 wasn't good odds, but he'd faced worse. He checked his Colt revolver, ensuring the powder was protected from the rain, then reached for the Winchester rifle strapped to his saddle. "Lord, help me bring these people home," he whispered, though he wasn't sure anyone was listening. Not after all he'd done. The plan formed in his mind as naturally as breathing. Create a distraction, draw them away from the wagon, pick them off one by one if possible. Avoid a direct shootout at all costs, too risky with hostages nearby. Thomas crept around the perimeter, staying low. The rain masked his approach, turning the world into a blur of grays and shadows. When he reached a position opposite the wagon, he took a deep breath and struck a match, lighting the bundle of sagebrush he'd gathered. He tossed it downhill, watching as it tumbled toward their horses. The dry interior of the plants caught quickly despite the rain. The smoke and sudden flare spooked the outlaws' horses, which began to whinny and pull at their stakes. 2 of the men immediately ran to settle them, cursing. "Coyotes again?" one shouted. "Nah, fire. Someone's out there," another called back. Thomas seized the moment, moving swiftly toward the wagon while the men were distracted. He crept underneath it, heart hammering as boots stomped past. When a pair of legs appeared directly beside him, Thomas reached out, yanking the man down and driving his knife between the outlaw's ribs before he could shout. The rain washed the blood from his hands as he pulled himself up to the back of the wagon. "Anyone makes a sound, you're dead," he whispered as he sliced through the canvas. Inside, 3 figures huddled together. Grace's eyes widened in recognition, but she kept silent. Beside her, a teenage boy, her brother Jacob, sat with his arm around their father, whose head was bandaged with what looked like a torn piece of Grace's dress. "Thomas," Grace mouthed, her face pale in the dim light. He nodded once, then motioned for them to stay quiet. "Can your father move?" he whispered. "Barely," she replied. They hit him hard when he tried to fight back. "We'll need to carry him then," Thomas said, his mind racing through options. "Jacob, you strong enough to help with that?" The boy nodded, determination in his eyes despite the fear. A shout from the other side of the camp told Thomas his distraction wouldn't hold them much longer. "When I say run, you head straight for the rocks to the north. Don't stop for anything." Grace reached out suddenly, her fingers brushing his rain-soaked sleeve. "Why did you come for us?" Their eyes locked, and for a heartbeat, the rain, the outlaws, the danger it all faded away. "Couldn't let them take you," he said simply. There was more, so much more he wanted to say, but now wasn't the time. Gunfire erupted as one of the outlaws spotted movement near their spooked horses. Thomas seized the opportunity. "Now!" he hissed, helping them out of the wagon. Jacob and Grace supported their father between them while Thomas provided cover, firing twice at the outlaws by the fire. One went down, clutching his shoulder. The others scattered, diving for cover and returning fire wildly. "Keep going," Thomas urged as they stumbled up the rocky slope. He fired again, more to keep the outlaws' heads down than with any real hope of hitting them in the darkness. The rain had turned the ground treacherous, and halfway up the slope, Mr. Brookfield's legs gave out. He collapsed with a grunt of pain, nearly pulling Grace down with him. "I can't," the older man gasped. "Leave me. Take the children." "Nobody gets left behind," Thomas growled, holstering his pistol and hoisting the man over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. "Grace, Jacob, keep moving." Bullets ricocheted off rocks around them as they scrambled upward. Thomas's legs burned with the effort of carrying the older man while navigating the slippery terrain, but he pushed forward, one step at a time. Grace looked back, her face a mask of worry and determination, then grabbed her brother's hand and pulled him onward. They reached the outcropping where Thunder waited, the horse stomping nervously at the sound of gunfire. "Get on," Thomas ordered, helping Mr. Brookfield onto the saddle despite the man's protests. "Jacob, climb up behind your father. Hold him steady." "What about you and Grace?" Jacob asked, already mounting. "We'll follow on foot. They'll be looking for a horse with 4 riders this way we split their attention." Thomas turned to Grace, who stood shivering in the rain. "Can you run?" She nodded, pulling her torn dress up slightly to free her legs. "I grew up outrunning my brothers. Lead the way." Thomas gave her a grim smile, then turned to Jacob. "Head east along the ridge. There's a line shack about 3 miles from here. Get your father inside and bar the door. We'll meet you there." With a slap to Thunder's flank, the horse took off with its 2 passengers. Thomas grabbed Grace's hand, and they plunged into the darkness, moving perpendicular to the horse's path. They ran through the rain-soaked wilderness, Thomas leading them on a winding route to throw off pursuit. Grace kept pace remarkably well despite her exhaustion, never complaining even when they had to wade through a creek swollen with rainwater. After 20 minutes of hard travel, they paused in the shelter of a small cave to catch their breath. The gunfire had long since faded, but Thomas knew the outlaws wouldn't give up easily. "You really came for us?" Grace said, her voice barely audible over the rain. She sat with her back against the cave wall, her dress soaked and muddied, her auburn hair plastered to her face. Thomas checked his pistol, counting remaining bullets. "I told you I would come back to Copper Creek someday," he said, not meeting her eyes. "But not like this." She pushed wet hair from her face. "How did you even know we'd been taken?" "I was on my way to town anyway. Ran into a traveler on the road who'd seen the smoke from your place." He finally looked at her. "Sheriff put together a posse, but they were headed in the wrong direction. I knew where Harlow liked to hole up." Grace studied him in the darkness. "You know these men?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Used to ride with them." Long time ago, before I went straight. He waited for the disgust, the fear to cross her face. Instead, she simply nodded. That explains how you found us so quickly. After a pause, she added, people can change, Thomas. A bitter laugh escaped him. Some things you can't wash away, no matter how hard the rain falls. Is that why you never came back after the dance? She asked, her voice soft but direct. The question caught him off guard. Didn't think a woman like you would want anything to do with someone like me once you knew the truth. You never gave me the chance to decide that for myself. There was a hint of anger beneath her exhaustion. A sound outside silenced them both. Thomas moved to the cave entrance, peering into the rain. A shadow moved between the trees downslope. They're tracking us, he whispered. We need to move. Grace rose without hesitation, her determination evident despite her fatigue. Which way? The line shack is still about 2 miles east, but they'll be expecting us to head there. He thought quickly. There's a waterfall half a mile north. We can use it to cover our trail, then circle back. They slipped out of the cave and into the rain once more, moving as quietly as possible through the underbrush. Grace's hand found his in the darkness, and he squeezed it reassuringly. The rain began to ease as they reached the waterfall, the clouds breaking to reveal a slice of moon. The silver light illuminated Grace's face as she looked up at the cascade of water thundering down the rocky cliff. We need to cross behind it, Thomas explained. There's a ledge. It's narrow, but it'll hide us. Grace nodded, her trust in him evident. Lead the way. Thomas went first, edging along the slick rock face behind the curtain of water. The roar was deafening, the spray cold against their already soaked bodies, but the ledge held firm beneath their feet. When they emerged on the other side, they found themselves in a small grotto hidden from view. We can rest here a moment, Thomas said. They won't find this place easily. Grace sank down on a relatively dry patch of stone, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth. Thomas shrugged out of his duster and draped it over her shoulders despite it being nearly as wet as her dress. You're shivering too, she protested. I'm used to it, he replied, though the night chill was indeed seeping into his bones. Grace shifted the coat to cover them both as he sat beside her, their shoulders touching. The simple act of sharing warmth shouldn't have felt so intimate, but Thomas found himself acutely aware of her presence, the subtle scent of lavender that somehow persisted despite days of captivity, the rise and fall of her breathing, the strength in her slender frame. When I saw you cut through that canvas, she said after a while, I thought I was dreaming. How could you possibly be there, in that moment when we needed someone most? Thomas stared at the silver-kissed water cascading before them. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Grace. Riding away from Copper Creek last spring was one of them. Her hand found his in the darkness. Why did you? Really? He took a deep breath. Because for the first time in years, I wanted something I didn't deserve. Something pure. He turned to look at her. When we danced, when you smiled at me like I was worth something, I got scared. Men like me don't get second chances with women like you. That wasn't your decision to make, she said firmly. I knew there was darkness in your past, Thomas. I could see it in your eyes. But I could also see the good in you, the man you're trying to become. A laugh escaped him, tinged with disbelief. And now, after seeing me kill a man without hesitation, after learning I rode with the same outlaws who took your family, now I see a man who rode through the night to save us, she said simply. A man whose heart beats for more than just survival. Her fingers tightened around his. That's the man I couldn't forget, no matter how I tried. Something broke open inside Thomas's chest, a dam he'd built years ago that could no longer hold against the flood of feeling her words released. Before he could respond, however, A gunshot echoed in the distance, followed by shouts. "They've found the line shack," he said, instantly alert. "Your father and brother." "We have to help them," Grace said, already on her feet. They navigated the ledge behind the waterfall once more and set off at a run through the forest. The rain had stopped entirely now, making it easier to move quickly but also easier to be spotted. Thomas led them on a circuitous route, avoiding open ground whenever possible. As they approached the line shack, Thomas pulled Grace down behind a fallen log. In the clearing ahead stood the small wooden structure, lamplight flickering through its single window. 3 men on horseback circled it like wolves, while a fourth Victor Harlow himself stood before the door. "Come on out, old man," Harlow called. "We know you're in there with the boy. Make it easy on yourselves." "I count 4, Thomas whispered. 1 by the door, 3 on horseback. What's the plan?" Grace asked, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. Thomas checked his ammunition one last time. "I'll create a distraction, draw them away from the shack. When I do, you run to the back window, get your family, and head for the trees to the south. And leave you to face 4 armed men alone?" "No. Grace, no." Her determination was unshakable. "Give me your spare pistol. I can shoot." Thomas hesitated, then nodded, handing her the smaller revolver he kept in his boot. "Stay low, aim for center mass, and don't hesitate. These men won't." She checked the pistol with practiced ease that surprised him. "My father taught all his children to defend themselves. I'm not just a dance partner, Thomas." A smile tugged at his lips despite the gravity of the situation. "I'm starting to see that." They split up, Thomas circling to the east while Grace positioned herself behind a cluster of boulders with a clear line of sight to the back of the shack. When he was in position, Thomas picked up a rock and hurled it at the horses, striking one on the flank. The animal reared in panic, throwing its rider. Thomas fired twice in quick succession, hitting another rider in the leg. The outlaws scattered for cover, returning fire wildly as they tried to locate their attacker. "Calloway!" Harlow shouted, recognizing Thomas's voice when he called for them to surrender. "Should have known you'd turn yellow. These people mean something to you. Let them go, Harlow," Thomas called back, changing position. "This is between you and me now. You betrayed the gang," Harlow snarled. "Now you'll watch these people die before I kill you too." One of the outlaws made a dash toward the shack door. A shot rang out not from Thomas's position and the man fell, clutching his shoulder. Grace's aim had been true. Taking advantage of the confusion, Thomas charged forward, firing as he ran. He caught one outlaw in the chest, sending him sprawling. The others returned fire, forcing Thomas behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood around him. Through the chaos, he glimpsed Grace darting toward the back of the shack. Relief surged through him as she disappeared from view, hopefully reuniting with her family. Now he just needed to keep Harlow and the remaining outlaw occupied long enough for them to escape. He was down to his last few bullets when a new volley of gunfire erupted, not aimed at him, but at Harlow and his man. Thomas peered around the trough to see Jacob Brookfield firing a rifle from the shack's window while Grace and her father emerged from the back, moving toward the trees. "Go!" Jacob shouted to them. "I'll cover you." Thomas seized the opportunity, breaking cover to flank Harlow. The outlaw leader saw him coming and swung his pistol around, but Thomas was faster. His bullet caught Harlow in the shoulder, spinning him but not dropping him. The remaining gang member fired at Thomas, the bullet grazing his arm in a line of fire. Grace appeared suddenly, her pistol steady as she fired at the last outlaw. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to make him duck, giving Thomas the opening he needed. His final bullet found its mark, and the man crumpled to the ground. Harlow, wounded but still dangerous, lurched toward Grace with murder in his eyes. Thomas threw himself forward, tackling the outlaw leader just as Grace fired again. Her bullet caught Harlow in the chest at the same moment Thomas's fist connected with his jaw. The outlaw leader went limp beneath him. Silence fell across the clearing, broken only by their ragged breathing and the distant rumble of thunder as the storm moved away. Thomas rose slowly, the pain in his arm making itself known now that the danger had passed. "Is it over?" Grace asked, the pistol still clutched in her trembling hand. Thomas gently took the weapon from her. "It's over. You're safe now." Jacob emerged from the shack, rifle still at the ready, followed by Mr. Brookfield, who leaned heavily on a makeshift crutch. "Thomas Calloway," the older man said, his voice weak but clear, "seems my family owes you their lives." "No, sir," Thomas replied, helping Grace steady her father. "I was just settling an old debt." The old man's eyes were shrewd. "Is that all it was?" Thomas glanced at Grace, who was watching him with an expression that made his heart race faster than it had during the gunfight. "No, sir, that's not all it was." They spent the night in the line shack, tending to wounds and regaining strength. Thomas fashioned a proper splint for Mr. Brookfield's injured leg, while Grace cleaned and bandaged the bullet graze on Thomas's arm. Her touch was gentle yet confident, her proximity making his pulse quicken despite his exhaustion. By morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the world washed clean beneath a brilliant blue sky. Thomas ventured out at dawn to retrieve Thunder and bury the dead outlaws. When he returned, he found Grace sitting alone on the shack's small porch. "We should be able to make it back to Copper Creek by nightfall," he said, securing the saddle on his horse. "Your father can ride Thunder. Jacob found one of the outlaws' horses that didn't run off, so he can ride that one. You and I can take turns walking." Grace studied him, her gaze penetrating. "And then what happens?" Thomas paused in his work. "What do you mean?" "After you deliver us safely home." She stood, approaching him. "Will you ride away again, Thomas Calloway?" He looked down at his hands, still stained with dirt from digging graves. "I'm not sure Copper Creek is ready to welcome someone with my past." "I'm not asking about Copper Creek," she said softly. "I'm asking about me." Thomas met her eyes then, finding no judgment there, only a question that demanded truth. "I rode through that storm thinking only of reaching you in time," he admitted. "My heart was beating so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. It wasn't just about settling old debts or doing the right thing. It was about you, Grace." She stepped closer. "Then why are you already planning to leave?" "Because I'm afraid," he confessed. "Afraid that once the danger has passed and life returns to normal, you'll see me clearly for what I am." "I see you clearly now, Thomas." She reached up, her palm resting against his cheek. "I see a man who has fought his way back from darkness. A man who risked everything to save my family. A man I've thought about every day since you rode away last spring." Thomas covered her hand with his own, scarcely able to believe her words. "I don't have much to offer, Grace. No land, no fortune. Just a troubled past and an uncertain future." A smile touched her lips. "I'm not asking for land or fortune. I'm asking if that heart of yours, the one that beat harder than the rain, has room in it for me." In answer, Thomas leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question in itself, but when Grace's arms wound around his neck, the kiss deepened into a promise neither had dared to voice until now. "I take it that's a yes," she murmured when they finally parted, her smile radiant despite the exhaustion of their ordeal. Thomas laughed, a sound of wonder and joy he scarcely recognized as his own. "It's a yes, Grace Brookfield. It's always been a yes, from the moment we danced." A discreet cough from the doorway interrupted them. Mr. Brookfield stood watching them, leaning on his crutch with Jacob beside him, both wearing expressions that mingled amusement with approval. "If you two are quite finished," the older man said dryly, "I believe we were planning to return home today." "Yes, sir," Thomas replied, not releasing Grace's hand. "But I should warn you, I might be asking to call on your daughter once we get there." The old man's eyes twinkled. "I'd be more surprised if you didn't after all this. Though I expect a proper courtship, mind you. My daughter deserves nothing less." "Agreed," Thomas said, helping the man toward Thunder. "And I intend to do things right this time." The journey back to Copper Creek was slow but uneventful. They arrived as the sun was setting, the town's lights twinkling welcome in the gathering dusk. News of the Brookfields' kidnapping had spread, and their return caused quite a stir. Sheriff Mills himself came running as they rode down the main street, his weathered face breaking into a smile of disbelief. "Well, I'll be," he said, helping Mr. Brookfield down from Thomas's horse. "When you rode out alone, Calloway, I thought we'd seen the last of you." "I made a promise," Thomas replied simply. The sheriff's gaze moved between Thomas and Grace, noting their clasped hands with raised eyebrows. "I see you found more than just the Brookfields out there." Grace smiled. "He found his way home, Sheriff." The weeks that followed were a time of healing and new beginnings. The Brookfield homestead had been damaged in the raid but not destroyed, and the people of Copper Creek rallied to help rebuild. Thomas worked alongside them, his skilled hands and quiet determination gradually earning the town's respect. There were whispers about his past, of course. Small towns had long memories, and some questioned whether a former outlaw could truly change his ways. But as summer bloomed across the Arizona territory, even the most skeptical had to admit that Thomas Calloway was a man transformed by love. On a warm evening in July, Thomas and Grace sat on the newly rebuilt porch of the Brookfield home, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. Mr. Brookfield dozed in his chair nearby, his leg healing well. Jacob was inside. Practicing his reading, he'd developed a sudden interest in law books, inspired by the man who'd saved them. "I got a letter today," Thomas said, his fingers entwined with Grace's. "From a rancher over in Colorado territory. He's offering me a job as foreman." Grace turned to him, her expression carefully neutral. "Colorado's a long way from here." "It is," he agreed, "which is why I wrote back declining the offer." Relief washed over her face. "You're staying then?" "Sheriff Mills offered me a deputy position." Thomas smiled. "Seems he thinks my particular knowledge of the criminal element might be valuable." "And you accepted?" "I did." He took a deep breath. "I want to build something here, Grace. Something that lasts." She leaned against his shoulder. "I'm glad. I wasn't ready to say goodbye." Thomas reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that caught the last rays of sunlight. "I'm hoping we never have to say goodbye." He opened his palm to reveal a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's. Not much to look at, but it's been waiting for the right woman." Grace's eyes widened. "Thomas, I know it's soon," he said quickly. "We can wait as long as you want, but I needed you to know that my heart is yours. Completely. That night in the rain wasn't the end of our story, it was just the beginning." Tears shimmered in Grace's eyes as she took the ring, sliding it onto her finger where it fit as if made for her. "It's not too soon," she whispered. "Not when you've had my heart since that first dance." Thomas kissed her then, pouring all the love and gratitude he couldn't express into that single gesture. When they parted, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "I never thought I'd find this," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Redemption, yes, I hoped for that, but not love. Not you." Grace smiled, resting her head against his chest where she could hear the steady beating of his heart. "Sometimes the things we don't think we deserve are exactly what we need most." In the years that followed, Copper Creek would tell many stories about Thomas and Grace Calloway, how he'd ridden through the worst storm in memory to save her family, how she'd seen the good in him when others saw only shadows, how they'd built a life together that stood as testament to the power of second chances. But Thomas and Grace knew the truth was both simpler and more profound than any fireside tale. It was in the quiet moments between storms, in promises kept and futures built day by day, in a love that had begun with a dance and been forged in rain and gunfire. A love that, like the wild country around them, had weathered storms and emerged stronger, wilder, and more beautiful than either could have imagined.